Valentina Tereshkova, the factory worker who became the first woman in space. Hey, welcome back to Void Drift. I'm Jan, and tonight we're starting an incredible journey through some of the most remarkable stories in space history. Stories of people who looked up at the sky and somehow found a way to get there, against odds that seemed impossible at the time. And there's no better place to start than with the very first one. The story of the first woman ever to leave our planet. Her name was Valentina Tereshkova. And honestly, when you learn how she got there, it almost sounds like something out of a movie. Valentina was born in 1937 in a small village called Maslenikovo, not far from the city of Yaroslavl in Russia. Her father was a tractor driver who was killed fighting in the war when Valentina was just a toddler. Her mother worked in a cotton mill to support the family. There was nothing about Valentina's early life that pointed towards space. No connections, no special schooling, no privilege of any kind. As a teenager, she went to work in a tire factory. Later, she moved to a textile mill, where she spent 7 years working as a seamstress and a fabric cutter. While she worked, she studied at night school to become a textile technician, finally earning her diploma in 1960. But there was one thing about Valentina that set her apart. Starting in 1955, she became passionate about parachute jumping. It started as a hobby, something she did for fun and for the thrill of it. She had no idea at the time that this hobby would change the entire course of her life. In April 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first human being to fly into space, and the whole world watched in amazement. Valentina was a huge admirer of his. But what she didn't know was that behind the scenes, the Soviet space program was already thinking about something even more ambitious. They wanted to send the first woman into space, and they wanted to make sure it happened before the Americans could do it. The man in charge of cosmonaut training, Nikolai Kamanin, had heard that female pilots in the United States were training for spaceflight as part of a program that would later become known as the Mercury 13. He wrote in his diary that the Soviet Union simply could not allow the first woman in space to be American. So the search began for Soviet women who might be up to the challenge. Here's where it gets interesting. The requirements weren't about being a pilot. Because of how the Vostok spacecraft worked, the cosmonauts actually had to eject from the capsule before landing and parachute down separately. So instead of looking for pilots, the program looked for parachutists. The Soviet Volunteer Society for Cooperation with the Army, Aviation, and the Navy put out a call for candidates. They needed to be parachute jumpers, under 30 years old, no taller than 170 centimeters, and weighing no more than 70 kilograms. Out of 400 women who applied, 58 passed the initial screening. That number was eventually narrowed down to 23, and then finally to a group of 5. Valentina Tereshkova was one of those 5. In February 1962, alongside 4 other women, she officially joined the Cosmonaut Corps. The training that followed was intense. Isolation tests, where the women were left completely alone for days to measure their psychological resilience. Centrifuge tests, to prepare their bodies for the crushing forces of launch. Thermal chamber tests, where they endured extreme heat. Pressure chamber training to simulate the vacuum of space. And on top of all that, they trained to fly MiG fighter jets, even though none of them had been pilots before. Valentina also went through water survival training, where small motorboats were used to create rough, chaotic conditions, simulating what it might be like to land somewhere unexpected, like the open ocean. By May 1963, the decision had been made. Valentina Tereshkova would fly aboard Vostok 6. The Soviet leadership liked the story behind her selection too. She was the daughter of a man who died fighting in the war, a former factory worker who had risen, quite literally, to the stars. It was a powerful symbol, and the government knew it. On June 16, 1963, Valentina launched from the Baikonur Cosmodrome. Her call sign was Chaika, which means seagull in Russian. And here's a detail that I find absolutely fascinating. She wasn't alone up there. Just 2 days earlier, a cosmonaut named Valery Bykovsky had launched aboard Vostok 5. For a period of time, the two spacecraft were both in orbit simultaneously, and at one point, they came within just 4.5 kilometers of each other. Picture that for a moment. Two human beings, both circling the Earth at thousands of kilometers per hour, passing close enough to almost see each other's spacecraft, at a time when spaceflight itself was still only a couple of years old. Valentina's mission lasted almost 3 full days. In that time, she orbited the Earth 48 times, spending a total of 71 hours in space. It wasn't an easy flight. She experienced significant nausea for parts of the mission and wasn't able to complete every experiment that had been planned. Spaceflight in 1963 was still raw, experimental, and physically grueling, especially for someone experiencing it for the very first time. But she pushed through it. On June 19th, following procedure, she ejected from the capsule and parachuted down to Earth, landing near the city of Novosibirsk. When she touched down, local farmers and villagers, who had no idea a Soviet cosmonaut was about to land in their fields, rushed over to find this woman in a spacesuit calmly gathering her parachute. She was given a hero's welcome that quickly spread across the entire country. In Moscow, she was honored with the title Pilot Cosmonaut of the Soviet Union. What's remarkable is just how long Valentina's record stood. She remains, to this day, the only woman in the history of spaceflight to have flown completely alone, on a solo mission, with no other crew members aboard her spacecraft. And it would take almost 2 full decades before another woman, Svetlana Savitskaya, would follow her into orbit in 1982. 20 years. Think about that gap. Tereshkova didn't just open a door. She walked through it alone, and then waited a generation for the next woman to walk through it too. Later in life, Valentina earned an engineering degree, eventually becoming an honorary major general in the Russian Air Force. She has spoken openly over the years about her enduring fascination with space, even saying in interviews that she would be willing to fly to Mars even if it meant never returning home. "Mars is my favorite planet," she once said. A crater on the moon was named Tereshkova in her honor back in 1970. To this day, she remains the last living cosmonaut from the original Vostok program, and the longest-serving spacefarer in the history of human spaceflight in terms of how long ago her mission took place. What strikes me most about Valentina's story is just how unlikely it was. A young woman with no flying experience, who simply loved jumping out of airplanes, ended up being chosen to make one of the most consequential journeys in human history. 63 years ago, she proved that the boundaries everyone assumed existed were nowhere near as fixed as people believed. The first person to look back at our entire planet from beyond it and see it for what it truly is, a single fragile world, happened to be a young woman from a small Russian village who started out cutting fabric in a textile mill. That's where our journey begins tonight. And there are 9 more stories just like this one waiting for you. So get comfortable, let your eyes close if you need to, and let's keep drifting through the stars together.